What if a single moment, a glance, a chance encounter was all it took to change everything? A wealthy man, withdrawn from the world, walks past a hospital hallway and sees her. A little girl, pale and trembling, trying to smile through pain no child should know. He doesn't know her name, doesn't know her story, but something about her stillness, her strength, stops him cold. He could have walked away. Instead, he stayed. This is not just a story about illness. It's about the unexpected power of compassion, of a man who thought he had nothing left to give, and a child who gave without asking. Their paths were never meant to cross, and yet, through kindness, courage, and quiet love, they built something that would outlive them both. This is Kimmy's story, and it starts with a stranger who chose to care. Tucked away in a sleepy corner of Maple Glen, a modest town with wide sidewalks and old sycamore trees, lived a little girl named Kim Carter and her mother, Annabelle. Their lives weren't perfect, far from it. They lived in a rented two-bedroom duplex that creaked when it rained and had a heater that wheezed every winter. But inside that home, laughter echoed louder than the wind, and love stretched far enough to cover every empty space. Kim, 12 years old and bursting with curiosity, had a way of brightening even the gloomiest mornings. She loved to draw. Her sketchbooks, mostly bought from the dollar store, overflowed with color. Trees that talked, smiling dogs in tutus, and the occasional flying jelly bean with a monocle. But, more than anything, Kim loved to make her mum laugh. "Why did the pencil break up with the eraser?" she once asked Annabelle while they were washing dishes. "I don't know. Why?" "Because it was tired of being rubbed the wrong way." Annabelle laughed so hard she dropped a glass. It had always been just the two of them. Kim never knew her father. Annabelle never really talked about him. She just said, "Some people are temporary, honey." But that doesn't mean the love we share has to be. Annabelle worked as a night shift cleaner at the local high school and did extra hours at a laundromat on weekends. She never complained. She packed Kim's lunch every morning with a little handwritten note tucked between her sandwich and an apple. "Shine today, my sunflower. Love, Mom." But everything started to shift one Thursday in early September. Kim had come home from school looking a little flushed. "You okay, sweetie?" Annabelle asked, wiping flour off her hands. She had tried to make cupcakes that afternoon, a rare treat. Kim shrugged. "Just tired. I fell asleep in math again." That night, she spiked a fever. Not terribly high, but enough to make Annabelle worry. She gave Kim some Tylenol and sat with her until the girl drifted off, cheeks burning against the pillow. By the weekend, Kim's energy dipped. She no longer ran up the stairs two at a time or colored in her sketchbooks. Her hands trembled slightly when she tried to draw. Then came the shortness of breath. They were at the grocery store. Kim was reaching for a box of cereal when she suddenly paused, gasping. Her knuckles turned pale as she clutched the shopping cart. "Mom?" she whispered, voice trembling. "I feel weird." Annabelle dropped her purse right there in the aisle and scooped Kim into her arms. The local clinic squeezed them in that afternoon. Dr. Shaw, a kind older man with thick glasses and a gentle voice, ran some basic tests. He frowned when Kim's blood pressure came back unusually low. He pressed on her abdomen, checked her fingernails, asked her if she had bruises. Kim lifted her sleeve to reveal small purplish marks near her elbow. "Huh," he muttered. Annabelle's heart sank. "We're going to run a few more tests," Dr. Shaw said carefully, "just to be thorough. I'd like to send her in for blood work." Annabelle nodded. "Of course." She smiled at Kim, who sat swinging her legs off the table, completely unfazed. The phone call came the next morning at 6:17 a.m. Annabelle was sipping cheap instant coffee at the kitchen counter when her phone buzzed. "Ms. Carter, This is Dr. Shaw. I'm so sorry to call so early, but we've got the lab results. I'd like you to bring Kimberly in. Today, as soon as possible. Something in his voice, tight, low, made her blood run cold. They were back in his office before 9 a.m. Kim sat beside her mother in an oversized hoodie, legs tucked up on the vinyl seat, drawing with a dull pencil on a crumpled napkin. Dr. Shaw cleared his throat and folded his hands. The blood work revealed that Kim's white cell count is extremely low. Her platelets are dangerously low too, the bruising, the fatigue, the fever. These all point to a condition called aplastic anemia. Annabelle blinked. I don't know what that means. It's a rare and serious condition, he said gently. Her bone marrow isn't producing enough new blood cells. It weakens the immune system and can be life-threatening without treatment. Annabelle's mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes darted to Kim, who was still drawing. But what causes it? Can it be fixed? In some cases, with the right treatment, transfusions, possibly a bone marrow transplant, but it requires specialized care. I've already contacted St. Elizabeth's in the city. They have a pediatric hematology unit. They're expecting you. Annabelle's hands clutched the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles turned white. She couldn't cry. Not now. Instead, she turned to Kim with a tight smile. Hey, baby. Looks like we get to visit the big hospital after all. Remember, you said you wanted to see a real cafeteria with a slushy machine. Kim looked up. Really? Can I bring my sketchbook? Of course, sweetheart. They stepped out into the parking lot, the sun unusually bright. Annabelle opened the car door and let Kim climb in first. Then she leaned against the frame, staring out at nothing, breathing in shallow gasps. Her little girl, her only child, her light. She wanted to scream. But when she turned back to Kim, the girl was humming softly and scribbling in her sketchbook. I'm drawing us, she said, on a rocket ship. We're going to a hospital on the moon. It has robots for doctors. Annabelle's heart twisted. She slid into the driver's seat, fastened Kim's seatbelt, and whispered, Everything's going to be okay, baby. Mummy promises. Her voice cracked on the last word, but Kim didn't notice. She believed her. And for now, that was enough. The ambulance ride to St. Elizabeth's Medical Center was quieter than Annabelle expected. Kim didn't ask many questions. She just held her sketchbook in her lap and gazed out the small window, watching trees and utility poles blur past. Every now and then, she'd point out a passing cloud that looked like a cat or a castle, but her voice was quieter than usual, like a radio turned low. Annabelle sat beside her, hands folded tightly, trying to keep her fear from rising into her throat. When they arrived, the Children's Oncology and Hematology wing was bustling. A nurse apologized profusely as she led them down a long corridor. I'm so sorry. Our pediatric long-term care unit is at capacity today. We're putting Kim in a temporary shared room in the general care unit until we get a proper bed available. Annabelle frowned. Is it safe? For her? Absolutely, the nurse reassured her. It's a quieter room near the end of the hall. One roommate, an older patient, very stable. We've kept things sanitized and safe. Room 412 sat at the far end of the hallway, tucked into a quiet corner of the building. When they entered, the first thing Annabelle noticed was the light. It poured in through the tall windows, bathing everything in a soft golden hue. The second thing she noticed was the woman in the other bed. She was old, frail. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her white hair was pinned back in a simple bun. She sat upright, wrapped in a shawl, gazing out the window without blinking. There was an untouched cup of tea on her tray and a book open on her lap, though she wasn't reading it. She doesn't talk much, the nurse whispered. Her name is Mrs. Reed. Been here for a while now. She's not dangerous, just very private." Annabel hesitated. She wasn't sure how she felt about her 12-year-old daughter sharing a room with someone who looked like she could vanish into the air at any moment. But Kim was already smiling. "She looks like one of the wise old ladies from the fairy tales, doesn't she?" "Kim," Annabel said softly, "let's get you settled, okay?" The next 2 days passed in a blur. Kim underwent blood transfusions and more tests. She was groggy, pale, and sore from the bone marrow biopsy. Annabel barely slept, resting only in short bursts in the uncomfortable recliner beside the bed. Despite the exhaustion, Kim's curiosity never waned. She would sneak glances at the old woman, who rarely moved or spoke. Once, Kim whispered, "She reminds me of a willow tree. Still and quiet, but she's seen everything." Annabel managed a tired smile. "Just don't bother her, okay?" But Kim was never one to stay silent for long. On the third night, the silence finally broke. Kim woke in the early hours of the morning, unable to sleep. The hospital bed creaked as she sat up, careful not to disturb her IV line. Her mother was fast asleep in the corner, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Kim grabbed her sketchbook and tiptoed over to the window seat beside the old woman. The lights of the city glowed outside, soft and orange against the dark sky. "Hi," Kim said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Kim." The old woman didn't turn right away. Then, after a long pause, she murmured, "I know." Kim tilted her head. "You do? You talk in your sleep." Kim grinned. "Oops, what did I say? You were yelling at a robot for not giving you ice cream." Kim laughed. "Sounds like me." The woman's lips curved, just slightly. "I'm Margaret." Kim slid onto the padded bench and pulled out a pencil. "Hi, Margaret. I like that name. It sounds like royalty." Margaret glanced at her for the first time. "And what are you then?" "I'm an artist," Kim said, proudly, flipping to a blank page. "Sort of." "What are you drawing?" "You," Kim replied without hesitation. "You've got a cool face, like you've seen things I haven't yet." Margaret made a soft sound, half a snort, half a hum. From that night on, something shifted. Margaret didn't suddenly become warm or chatty, but she let Kim sit near her. She watched silently as Kim drew little pictures of teacups, stars, silly birds with big feet. Sometimes Kim would leave a sketch on Margaret's tray. Sometimes Margaret would quietly slide it into her book without a word. One morning, Kim offered her a paper crane she'd folded from a napkin. "It's for luck," she said. Margaret didn't respond, but that evening, the crane was perched gently on her bedside table. They began to talk in fragments. Margaret would share slivers of memories, long ago winters, the smell of cinnamon, ballroom dances with a clumsy husband. She never mentioned her son, not directly, but Kim didn't need to ask. She was happy just listening. Neither Kim nor Annabel knew who Margaret really was. They didn't know that she was the mother of Walter Reed, former business magnate, media-averse millionaire, and one of the most enigmatic figures in recent financial history. Walter had disappeared from public view 5 years earlier, following a series of personal losses and public betrayals that left him disillusioned with the world he once ruled. Now, he came to the hospital every day at precisely 10 a.m., always carrying the same thermos of soup and a small bag of ginger candies. He never spoke much, only sat with Margaret for 20 minutes before slipping away like a shadow. Kim saw him once from the hallway. "He looks lonely," she whispered to a nurse. The nurse only nodded. "He is." But for Kim, the old woman in the bed beside her wasn't a mystery or a headline. She was a soft-voiced, watchful companion who slowly began to feel like something Kim never had, a grandmother. One afternoon, Kim brought over a steaming mug of ginger tea. The nurse helped her prepare. "I figured you might like it," she said. "It smells nice, like warm hugs." Margaret took it with 2 hands and sipped slowly. Her eyes closed. "I haven't had ginger tea in years," she murmured. "My son used to make it for me when he was little." Kim smiled. "He must have been sweet." Margaret didn't answer. But the next morning, when Kim woke up, she found a small wooden charm tied to her IV pole, a tiny bird carved out of cedar, worn smooth with time. There was no note. But Kim knew who it was from, and somehow that was more than enough. The first time Kim saw the man in the grey coat, she was sipping juice through a straw and colouring a giraffe that wore rain boots. He sat just outside room 412, in the waiting alcove beside the elevator. Same place, same time every morning, 10 a.m. sharp, like clockwork, always alone, always still. A thermos of soup in one hand, his phone untouched in the other. He never scrolled, never called. He just sat, his gaze unfocused, staring somewhere past the walls, as though listening to music no one else could hear. At first, Kim thought he might have been a pastor or a doctor. He dressed plainly, wool coat, pressed slacks, leather shoes that had seen better days. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his jaw strong, but his shoulders curved inward slightly, like a man who carried more than just age. "Who's he?" Kim had asked Margaret once, pointing discreetly. Margaret had snorted softly. "That's my son." Kim blinked. "That's Walter?" "But he's so serious." "He was born serious," Margaret replied. Came out frowning, I think. Kim smiled at the image. Still, she watched him. Every day, Walter Reed entered the room quietly, nodded politely to the nurse if she was there, and set the thermos on his mother's tray. He never lingered long, 20 minutes, tops. Then he left, with the same silence he arrived with, not even sparing a glance at Kim, who always looked up from her sketchbook with polite curiosity. He wasn't rude. He was unreachable. A sealed vault. And that fascinated Kim. The first interaction came unexpectedly during one of Margaret's rougher mornings. It was just after 9:30 a.m. Kim had finished her round of labs early and was back in bed, curled under a fleece blanket. Her mother had gone downstairs to the cafeteria to get a cup of real coffee, Annabelle's first break in 2 days. The nurse was restocking supplies nearby when Margaret began coughing, a harsh, ragged sound that shook her small frame. Kim sat up immediately. "Mrs. Reed?" The cough worsened. Margaret tried to lean forward, but her muscles trembled. Her cup of water tipped slightly on the tray. The nurse was out of view, tending to another patient down the hall. Without hesitation, Kim jumped from her bed, tugging her IV pole beside her, and gently reached out to support Margaret's shoulders. "You're okay," Kim whispered, grabbing a tissue and pressing it to the older woman's mouth as the coughing fit subsided. "Breathe slow. In and out." Margaret let her. Her bony fingers clutched Kim's wrist, her lips pale, but she nodded. Eventually the coughing stopped. "Better?" Kim asked. Margaret gave a tired smile. "Thank you, sweetheart." That's when he appeared. Walter stood frozen in the doorway, thermos still in hand, eyes fixed on the scene before him. His mother, frail and trembling, propped up by a 12-year-old girl in cartoon print pajamas and hospital socks. Their eyes met. Kim didn't flinch. She straightened up, gently repositioned Margaret's pillow, and said calmly, "She just needed a little help sitting up. My mum gets like that sometimes too. You learn how to support the back and shoulders." Walter said nothing. His eyes flicked to Margaret, who gave him the faintest nod. Then back to Kim. "I'm sorry you had to," he said quietly. Kim shrugged, unconcerned. "It's okay. I don't mind." And just like that, the moment passed. He walked in, set the thermos down, sat beside his mother, and didn't look at Kim again that day. But something had cracked. The next morning he glanced at Kim as he passed by. It was brief, half a second, but Kim noticed. She smiled. He didn't smile back. But he did pause for just a beat longer than usual before entering the room. That week, Kim drew a picture. It wasn't like her usual silly sketches of space bunnies or skateboarding frogs. This one was quiet, gentle, thoughtful. She drew Walter sitting beside Margaret's bed, his coat still on, hands folded in his lap, a soup thermos on the tray. But this time, she gave him something else. She gave him a smile. A small, tired smile, not wide or perfect, but soft, real, like the smile of a man who had just remembered something kind. At the bottom of the page, she scribbled a note in blocky handwriting. "Your eyes look sad, but I think they used to laugh." She left it folded on his mother's tray the next morning before going to her own blood transfusion. When she came back, the drawing was gone. Annabelle noticed the shift too. "He's not so scary when he looks at you," she told Kim. Kim shrugged. "I think he's just been sad for too long, like he forgot how to be anything else." Annabelle sat beside her and gently ran fingers through her daughter's hair. "Some people build walls around themselves, sweetie. But sometimes, all it takes is someone small and persistent to plant a little flower in the cracks." Kim grinned. "That's me. I'm the flower ninja." Later that week, Walter lingered by the room a few minutes longer after his visit. He stood by the window, watching the rain tap against the glass. Kim was drawing in bed, her IV humming softly. "I saw your drawing," he said without turning around. Kim looked up. "Oh, did you like it?" He nodded once. "You're observant." Kim smiled. "I draw what I see." He glanced at her then, just for a moment. "Most people don't." Then he left. The next day, there was a small package on Kim's tray when she returned from her afternoon treatment. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with a thin ribbon. Inside was a brand new sketchbook, hardcover, smooth pages, and a set of professional colored pencils. No note, but Kim knew. She looked toward the hallway. He wasn't there. She smiled anyway. Walter didn't become talkative. He didn't suddenly sit by Kim's bed and share stories. That wasn't him. But he began to see her. Every morning he nodded when he passed. Every now and then he asked, "How are you feeling today?" And when she told him she drew something new, he'd pause and say, "I'd like to see it sometime." He never asked questions. But he started listening, and inside Walter Reed, whose heart had gone cold and silent years ago, something stirred. A flicker, a seed. He didn't know what it meant yet. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't dread coming to the hospital. By the end of her second week in room 412, Kim Carter had become a quiet fixture in the ward, a presence as gentle and steady as the sunrise through the window each morning. She didn't ask for much, didn't complain, didn't act like someone whose blood was betraying her, whose body was growing weaker with each passing day. She just noticed things. When Margaret's blanket slipped to the floor during the night, Kim was the first to reach it and tuck it gently back over the older woman's feet. When Mr. Alvarez in the next room struggled to reach the call button, Kim buzzed the nurse without hesitation. When a little girl down the hall had to be sedated for an MRI, Kim waited for her afterward with a paper crane and a soft, "You did really, really good," like a ninja with sleepy powers. No one asked her to do these things. No one had to. Kindness for Kim was like breathing. Walter Reed had grown used to routines. They helped him keep the noise out. Every morning at 10 a.m., he arrived with his mother's soup and sat beside her for exactly 20 minutes. He read the paper, asked if she'd slept, and refilled her water. Then he left. No one stopped him. No one expected more. That was how he liked it. Until Kim Carter. At first, she was just the quiet child in the next bed. The one who whispered stories to Margaret at night, who sipped ginger tea with the careful hands of someone much older than she looked. But little by little, Walter started seeing her, not just noticing her presence, but actually seeing her. He saw how nurses lingered a little longer at her bedside just to chat. He saw how the overworked intern paused to ask Kim if she wanted to hear a joke, because she always laughed. He saw how the custodian, who rarely spoke, would leave an extra packet of graham crackers at Kim's tray without a word. It wasn't that she did anything grand. She simply made people feel like they mattered. And to a man who had once believed only power and profit moved the world, that was disarming. That Thursday afternoon, Walter sat beside his mother while she dozed. The room was quiet, save for the soft beep of monitors and the occasional shuffling of slippers down the hall. From the other side of the curtain, he heard Kim speaking in a low voice. "Mum, can we share the apple slices with the nurse? The one with the pretty braid. She looked really tired today." Annabelle's voice replied, gentle and warm, "Of course, sweetheart." "That's very thoughtful of you." Walter said nothing, but his hand froze mid-page. That night, he found himself thinking about that small exchange more than any business headline he'd read all day. Over the next few days, Walter started staying longer than 20 minutes. Not much longer, just enough to observe. He watched as Kim helped Margaret adjust her pillow or whispered silly bedtime stories about talking raccoons and noble broccoli nights. He noticed that Margaret, who had once refused to talk about anything except weather, now smiled before falling asleep. And that smile, Walter realized, wasn't for him. It was for her. For the girl who asked nothing in return for what she gave. That Sunday evening, Walter arrived late, well past visiting hours. He'd had a meeting across town that ran over, and traffic had turned the freeway into a parking lot. Still, he showed up. Something inside him said he needed to. Margaret was already asleep when he entered. The lights were dim, the nurses on night shift moving quietly down the halls. Kim was awake, curled in her bed with her sketchbook resting on her knees, a cup of tea steaming on the tray beside her. She looked up when he entered, not surprised, not expectant, just calm. Walter gave her a small nod. She nodded back. Then, softly, she asked, "Rough day?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You look tired," she said, "but not the kind of tired you fix with sleep." Walter stared at her for a second, unsure how to respond. He cleared his throat. "Some days are complicated." Kim nodded like she understood. "Yeah, same here." That was it. No deep advice, no probing questions, just understanding. Later that night, Walter sat in his apartment, staring out at the city skyline. The lights blurred in his vision, not from exhaustion, but from something else. It had been so long since someone had spoken to him without expectation, so long since someone had noticed him in the way Kim had, without judgment, without fear, without agenda. And she was 12, dying, and still giving more than most people he'd ever met. The next morning, he arrived with 2 cups of ginger tea. He handed one to his mother. The other he placed carefully on Kim's tray. She looked up in surprise. "For me?" Walter nodded. "You deserve it." Kim smiled. "Thanks. This'll go great with Captain Ginger's next adventure." Walter didn't ask what that meant. He didn't need to. From that day on, something unspoken existed between them, a quiet understanding. Walter didn't hover. He didn't ask questions. But he watched. He noticed. And slowly, his heart, a heart weathered by loss, pride, and years of silence, began to soften. He realized he didn't just admire Kim. He cared about her. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because she reminded him of the better parts of himself, the ones he thought he'd buried, the ones he might, just might, be able to find again. If Kim was the sunlight that warmed room 412, then Annabelle was the flame that kept it burning through the night. She didn't talk much to the other families. She didn't ask for favors or sympathy. She was always polite, always present, always composed. But there was something in her eyes behind the kindness and the firm set of her jaw that told a deeper story. One of exhaustion, yes, but more than that. Of quiet, relentless devotion. Annabelle was often up before the nurses changed shifts. She brushed Kim's hair gently, made sure her breakfast tray had her favorite applesauce, and always checked her chart with careful eyes, even though she didn't understand half the medical terms. She never left Kim alone, unless she absolutely had to, so when she approached the hospital's volunteer coordinator and asked, "Is there any way I could work a few hours?" they were surprised. "I just need something part-time, evening shifts maybe," she added. "Anything to help with the bills." She wasn't looking for charity. She was looking for dignity. Within a few days, she started helping in the cafeteria, prepping sandwich trays, wiping down tables, washing dishes. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, especially after long days in the ward. But Annabelle didn't complain. She worked quietly, sleeves rolled to the elbow, wedding ring long gone, hands roughened from chemicals and hot water. She wore non-slip shoes she'd borrowed from a neighbor before coming to the city, and a name badge that said Annie, Volunteer Support. She always returned to Kim's bedside before lights out, always with a soft smile, even when her knees ached and her palms stung. One evening, Walter was leaving room 412, a little later than usual. Rain tapped lightly on the windows. The hospital hallway was dim, quieter than usual, with most patients asleep and staff switching shifts. As he stepped through the lobby toward the exit, something made him pause. Outside, beneath the covered walkway, sat a solitary figure hunched on a bench. The rain was heavier now, wind slicing sideways across the parking lot. The woman's back was turned, but Walter recognized the profile immediately. Annabelle. She was sitting completely still, arms wrapped around herself, elbows resting on her knees. Her apron was still tied around her waist, soaked and clinging to her. He hesitated, then slowly pushed the door open and walked toward her. "Mrs. Carter." She startled slightly, then sat up straighter. "Oh, Mr. Reed. I didn't expect... I was on my way out." He studied her in the half-light. "You've been working?" She nodded. "A few hours in the kitchen. They needed help. It keeps my hands busy." Walter's gaze dropped to her fingers. The skin on her knuckles was red and raw, some areas visibly cracked. She followed his eyes and pulled her sleeves down, instinctively. "They're fine. The hot water's rough, but I'm used to it." "You shouldn't be doing this," he said softly. "You're here for your daughter." Annabelle gave a faint, tired smile. "Exactly. That's why I do it." He didn't say anything at first. Then quietly, he sat beside her, close enough to offer solidarity, but far enough not to intrude. "I saw Kim helping my mother with her pillow the other day," he said. "I didn't ask her to." "She just does that," Annabelle replied. "She sees people. She cares." He nodded. "She's remarkable." Annabelle looked out toward the rain. "I try to make things feel normal for her. I know this place isn't home, but if she can still laugh, still draw, Still believe that kindness matters? Then maybe I haven't failed her yet. Walter turned to her, watching her in silence. You haven't failed her, he said. She didn't reply, but something in her expression shifted. For the first time since they'd met, she let the weariness show. That night, back in his apartment, Walter didn't touch his dinner. Instead, he opened his laptop and began researching aplastic anemia. He read medical articles, treatment plans, case studies. Some of it was beyond him, but he persisted. He opened tabs about bone marrow transplants, donor matches, survival rates, insurance delays, hospital backlogs. He scribbled down questions on a notepad. Then, the next morning, instead of heading straight to room 412, Walter requested to speak to Dr. Harold Wexler, the head of pediatric hematology. The receptionist blinked. Are you family? No, Walter said, then after a pause, not yet. She scheduled the meeting. When Dr. Wexler met with him, Walter didn't waste time. I need to know Kim Carter's treatment path, he said. Her odds. What's been done, what hasn't, and what it would take to give her the best shot. Wexler frowned. I'm not sure I can legally share. I'm not asking for her chart, Walter interrupted. I'm asking what kind of care someone like her needs. Hypothetically. The doctor studied him. You're serious? I don't do anything halfway, Walter said. After a long pause, Wexler leaned back. Well then, let's talk options. Back in room 412, Kim was drawing. Annabelle sat beside her, feet tucked under the chair, hands still red from scrubbing steel trays. When Kim looked up, she saw her mum's tired eyes, the way she winced a little as she adjusted in the seat. Without a word, she reached over and placed a hand over Annabelle's. Then she turned her sketchbook around and revealed her latest drawing. It was a cartoon version of Annabelle. Apron, rubber gloves, hair tied back in a bun, one hand holding a scrub brush, and the other wrapped protectively around a smiling Kim. At the bottom were the words, "My superhero doesn't wear a cape. She wears a name tag and smells like dish soap." Annabelle blinked hard, lips pressed together. Kim just smiled and whispered, "You're my favorite person in the world, Mum." Annabelle didn't speak. She just leaned down, pressed her forehead to Kim's, and held it there for a long, quiet moment. Outside the curtain, Walter stood without announcing himself. He had come to drop off a ginger tea, but he paused when he heard the exchange. He didn't want to intrude, but his heart, once dormant, stirred. There were some kinds of strength that weren't loud or flashy, some kinds of heroism that didn't demand to be seen. Annabelle Carter was made of that strength, and for the first time since his daughter's death, Walter felt something other than regret. He felt respect. Margaret Reed had always been made of quiet strength. Even as age and illness stole her appetite and slowed her movements, she clung to one final truth. She still had her mind, and she knew what she saw. And what she saw, clearly, undeniably, was the young girl lying in the bed beside hers. Kim Carter, with her warm voice, her cracked jokes, her little kindnesses offered without fanfare. She was a flicker of joy in a place that had long forgotten light. In those quiet, drowsy afternoons, Margaret often watched Kim without the girl realizing. She listened to her comfort other patients, saw how she supported her exhausted mother, and how she smiled through pain no child should have to bear. And in those moments, Margaret didn't feel like a dying woman. She felt alive. That Thursday night, a storm rolled over the city, rain slapping against the windows, thunder murmuring behind the hills. The hospital dimmed to its usual nighttime hush, machines pulsing like tired heartbeats, voices lowered to whispers. Walter had stayed longer than usual. His mother had drifted in and out of sleep, her hands cool but still warm enough to hold. He sat beside her, coat draped over the back of the chair, staring at the monitors more than at his phone, Around midnight, her fingers twitched. He looked up. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but aware. Her lips moved. He leaned in. "Mum?" She didn't speak right away. Her hand closed around his wrist with surprising strength. And then, through shallow, tired breaths, she whispered, "Thank the little girl." Walter blinked. "Kim." Margaret nodded faintly. "She makes me feel like I'm still here. Tell her thank you." Her voice cracked. "Promise me." Walter swallowed hard. "I will." Margaret gave him a look he hadn't seen since childhood, a look that left no room for argument. Then she fell back asleep. The following morning, Walter requested a meeting with Dr. Wexler, head of the pediatric unit. He didn't walk in as a millionaire. He walked in as a man who had been changed. "I want her surgery handled by the best surgeon available," he said quietly. "And I want all costs covered." Quietly. Wexler raised a brow. "You're talking about Kimberly Carter." "Yes. We've just received the test results. The transplant team thinks she has a strong chance if the procedure is done soon." "Then make it happen," Walter said. "I'll cover everything. Under a private fund. No name, no contact, no questions. Just do it right." Wexler leaned back, surprised. "You really don't want them to know?" Walter shook his head. "She's been strong all on her own. I don't want to take that away from her. Or from her mother." That same afternoon, Annabelle was called into a meeting with the hospital care team. She left room 412 with a notebook and a worried look. When she returned, Kim was propped up on pillows, scribbling something cheerful onto her IV tubing with markers. "Well?" Kim asked, bright-eyed. "Did they say I can finally be a robot?" Annabelle smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "They said the transplant is possible," she replied gently. "They've located a potential donor, and they want to proceed as soon as possible." Kim's smile faded a little. "But there's a lot to figure out," Annabelle admitted. "It's a big surgery, and big surgeries cost money." She didn't tell her daughter about the spreadsheets, about the part-time job she just quit because her hours were conflicting with Kim's treatments, about the call she'd made to the financial assistance office that morning, trying not to cry. Instead, she cupped her daughter's cheek and whispered, "But I'll figure it out. I always do." Kim didn't argue. She just reached for her sketchbook and flipped to a new page. Later that evening, Walter stood at the corner of the hallway, far enough from room 412 not to intrude. Through the partially open curtain, he could hear Kim humming softly while Annabelle sat beside her, rubbing her feet the way she always did at night. Their conversation was barely above a murmur. "I'll be brave," Kim said. "But I don't want you to be scared, okay?" "I'm not scared," Annabelle replied, voice steady. "I'm proud." Walter swallowed hard. At the same time, down in the hospital's finance department, a quiet notice appeared on Kim Carter's file. All outstanding and future medical costs, including surgery, medication, lodging and recovery support, fully covered by private donor fund number 67. No one questioned it. No one knew who signed the wire transfer. Walter made sure of that. Back in room 412, Kim finished her latest drawing. It showed a hospital room full of smiling people, nurses, patients, staff. A little girl in a cape, a tired mom in an apron holding a mop like a sword. And in the corner, beside a sleeping old lady, was a man in a grey coat holding a teacup. She looked up at Annabelle. "Do you think it's okay to trust someone we don't really know?" Kim asked. Annabelle looked thoughtful. "Sometimes the people who change our lives don't make big entrances. They just show up." Kim nodded, content with that answer. At that very moment, Walter stood outside Margaret's room, watching her chest rise and fall peacefully. He reached for her hand. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to get her chance." Margaret stirred just enough to give his hand a small squeeze. And Walter, who had once only believed in control, caution, and calculated returns, felt something shift for good. He wasn't doing this to fix himself. He wasn't doing it for applause. He was doing it because it was right. Because sometimes the smallest hands rebuild the most broken pieces. And because his mother had taught him, long ago and again now, that true gratitude demands action. The hallway outside room 412 had been unusually quiet that morning. Even the nurses seemed to speak in hushed tones, their glances cautious as they moved between beds. Annabelle sensed it immediately, an invisible shift in the air, like the static before a thunderstorm. She'd just returned from the pharmacy window with Kim's evening medication when she spotted him. He stood at the end of the hallway, one hand gripping a bag of takeout, the other holding a stuffed bear with a crooked bow tie. His clothes were cleaner than she remembered. Button-down shirt tucked into new jeans, hair combed. The scent of cologne hung faintly in the air. But Annabelle didn't need the details to recognize him. Nathan Carter. The man who had disappeared when Kim was 3. The man who once threw a chair across their kitchen during a fight over a credit card bill. The man who had screamed that fatherhood was a mistake forced on him. Annabelle froze, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought about turning away, pretending she hadn't seen him. But then Kim's soft laughter drifted from behind the curtain. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked straight toward him. "Nathan," she said, voice low and cold. He turned, lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Annie," he said, as if they were old friends reunited. "You look tired." "What are you doing here?" she asked, her fingers tightening around the paper bag in her hand. "I heard," he said, his voice dropping, "about Kim. I saw a post online. Someone from the old neighborhood. I needed to come. I've changed, Annabelle. I'm not the same man I was." She stared at him. "And what man exactly were you before, Nathan? The one who slammed the door while our daughter was crying in a high chair? The one who drained our bank account and disappeared for 9 years?" He flinched, but quickly recovered. "I know I was wrong. I'm here to make things right." Annabelle didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away. But Nathan followed her. Kim was sitting up in bed when Annabelle entered the room. "Mum, someone brought me cookies," she said cheerfully, holding up a bag from the bakery in the lobby. "And a doll." Annabelle froze. And there he was, already standing at the curtain, smiling as if he belonged. "Hi, sweet pea," Nathan said softly. "It's me, Daddy." Kim blinked. Her expression shifted, uncertain. "You're Daddy?" Annabelle stepped in. "Nathan, she doesn't remember you." He nodded slowly. "I know, but maybe we can fix that. Right, kiddo?" He walked toward the bed and sat on the edge, gently placing the doll in Kim's lap. "You always loved these. I thought you deserved something special." Kim looked down at the doll, then back at him. "Are you really my dad?" He swallowed. "Yes, baby. I am. And I'm here now. For you." That night, Annabelle couldn't sleep. She sat in the corner of the hospital room, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the sleeping form of her daughter. Nathan's voice echoed in her mind. Too smooth, too rehearsed. She didn't trust him, not for a second. But Kim. Kim had looked at him with something like hope, and that terrified her. Walter found her in the break room early the next morning, stirring black coffee without drinking it. "Annabelle," he said gently. She looked up, surprised. "Are you all right?" She hesitated. Then quietly, she told him everything. about Nathan's sudden reappearance, about the doll, about the cookies, about the years of silence and now, the too timely return. Walter listened in silence, his face unreadable. Then, after a pause, he said, "Do you mind if I check into something?" Annabelle blinked. "Check? I know people who look into backgrounds, discreetly. I just want to make sure there's nothing else going on." She stared at him, uncertain. "I won't interfere," he said, "but if someone shows up after 9 years with a smile and no explanation, I'd rather know what they're really after." Annabelle hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Walter gave her a small nod. "I'll keep it quiet." Over the next few days, Nathan became a regular presence in the hospital. He brought flowers, juice boxes, handmade cards with dad and daughter written in bold marker. He took photos with Kim on his phone, posing her with her IV pole like it was a magic wand. Kim, ever open-hearted, began warming up to him. "He's funny, Mum," she said one afternoon. "He said when I get better, we'll go to Disneyland." Annabelle smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Because every time Nathan smiled, she saw the flash of rage behind his eyes from years ago. The way he once smashed her phone against a wall. The time he told her she was a burden, just like the baby growing inside her. He hadn't earned this new chapter. He was writing himself into it anyway. 3 days later, Walter received the report. He sat at his kitchen table late at night, the envelope heavy in his hands. Nathan Carter had outstanding debts in multiple states, a recent bankruptcy filing under a shell business, a short stint in rehab 2 years ago, and most alarming, an inquiry into a payout program for children with chronic illness, filed under Kim's name just 2 weeks earlier. Walter leaned back, heart thudding. He had seen men like this before, opportunists, manipulators, people who slipped into tragedy like thieves in the night. Only this time, the tragedy was 12 years old, and smiling at her father like he was real. Walter closed the folder and picked up his phone. It was time to protect what mattered, even if it meant stepping into the storm. The night before Kim's surgery, the hospital was quiet, but the air in room 412 trembled with something unspoken. Kim sat in bed, finishing one last drawing. It was a garden, bright, alive. Children danced beneath lanterns, flowers bloomed along cobblestone paths, and in the center stood her mother, smiling with open arms. Beside her was a man with silver hair, pouring tea from a small kettle. Walter. The door creaked open. Nathan stepped inside, holding a takeout bag and a stuffed bear. His shirt was pressed, his hair combed, but the charm in his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," he said casually. "Look what I brought. Your favorite cookies." Kim gave a polite nod. "Thank you, Dad." Nathan's eyes fell on the drawing, his brows furrowed. "What's this?" Kim looked down. "Just something I imagined. A peaceful place, where people are kind." Nathan scoffed. "Kind? In this world?" He shook his head, muttering, "Still stuck in fantasy." Then, without warning, he reached over and ripped the page from her hands. "Stop wasting your time," he snapped. "This won't save you. You think drawing makes a difference? That's kid stuff. Useless." He crumpled the paper and hurled it to the ground. Kim gasped, reaching down with trembling hands to retrieve it. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't tell you the truth." His voice rose, eyes narrowing. "Grow up, Kim. No one's going to hand you some magical fairy tale life." And then, when she looked up, heartbroken, eyes glassy, he snapped. "Don't give me that look," he barked, and before anyone could react, his hand lashed out. Crack. His palm struck her face hard enough to whip her head sideways. Annabelle screamed and collapsed in shock as she witnessed Nathan's aggressive behavior. Kim didn't fall, but the red mark bloomed instantly. Her breath hitched and her fingers clutched the bed rail. She didn't cry. She just stared at him. A moment passed, thick, frozen. Then the door slammed open behind them. Walter Reed stood in the frame like a force of nature. The moment he saw Kim, shaking, her cheek burning red, his face turned to stone. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside Kim, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I've got you." Kim leaned into him, her body shuddering softly. But Nathan's fury ignited. His voice boomed through the room. "Get away from her!" Walter didn't move. Nathan stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward him. "You think you can walk in here and replace me? She's my daughter." Walter stood slowly, placing himself fully between Nathan and Kim. "No," he said coldly, "she's not your daughter. You lost that right the day you left, the day you raised your hand against her." "I came back," Nathan snarled. "That counts for something." Walter's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "You came back for money. You came back to file fraud under her name. You came back with a gift bag and empty words, and now you come back with violence." "I'll have you thrown out," Nathan barked. "You won't need to," Walter said. "I already filed a report. I have hallway footage, audio recordings, and bank transfer logs. There's a case open. If you don't leave this hospital immediately, security will put you in handcuffs before dawn." Nathan froze. Then, his pride shattered, he turned to Annabelle. "You're just going to let him—" But Annabelle had already moved. She stepped forward with eyes like fire, her hand raised as if daring him to speak again. "If you ever show your face near my daughter again," she hissed, "you'll be behind bars so fast you won't remember which lie to cry about." Nathan stared at them all, Walter standing like a shield, Annabelle like a storm, and Kim, quiet but unafraid. He turned, muttering curses under his breath, and slammed the door behind him as he fled down the hall. Silence. Walter turned back to Kim, kneeling again. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice trembling. Kim touched her cheek gently and nodded. "Just sad." "I really liked that drawing." Walter smiled softly. "Then draw it again. And this time, let's try to build it together." She blinked. "Together?" "If your mum agrees," he said, glancing at Annabelle. "I'd like to stay. Not just visit." Kim looked up, eyes wide. "You'd really want to be my dad?" Walter's breath caught. "If you'll have me, not to replace anyone, just to give you more care, more laughs, more hands to hold when it's scary." Annabelle placed her hand on Kim's shoulder, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It's your choice, baby." Kim looked at Walter again, then slowly reached out and held his hand. "Okay," she whispered. And in that moment, a family formed. Not from blood, but from something stronger. From choice, from love, from the light that even pain couldn't dim. The surgery was performed the next day. The surgical team had done everything they could. Dr. Wexler had personally led the operation, and the room had been filled with only the best: the transplant specialist, the pediatric anesthesiologist, a second cardiologist on standby. Months of planning condensed into a few critical hours under blinding white lights. Walter paced the corridor, his hands clenched, his usually sharp gaze unfocused. Annabelle sat on the edge of a chair, motionless, her palms pressed together as if in prayer. Her lips moved, silently repeating one line: "Please, come back to me." Time slowed, and then it stopped. Dr. Wexler stepped into the hallway with his surgical cap still on, his shoulders lower than they'd been in any meeting before. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at Annabelle, then Walter, and shook his head. The room was silent when they walked in. Kim's body lay still beneath the pale blue blanket, her face soft, lips gently parted as if she were mid-story. The machines had been turned off. The hum, the beeping, the monitoring. It was all gone. Walter stood at the foot of the bed, barely able to breathe. His knees wanted to give, but something stronger inside him said, "Not now, not in front of her." Annabelle moved first. She sat beside Kim, taking one of her daughter's hands in hers. The hand was still warm. She didn't cry. Not loudly. Not at all. She just held it. Rubbed her thumb in slow circles over Kim's knuckles, over the same fingers she'd once kissed after scraped knees and messy art projects. Walter slowly approached the other side of the bed. In his palm, he held a small, polished pin, the size of a coin, shaped like a heart with wings. He had it made weeks ago, quietly. He wasn't sure he'd ever find the right moment to give it. Now, with shaking fingers, he placed it in Kim's small hand, curling her fingers around it gently. On the back, engraved in simple letters, were the words, "My daughter, the light at the end of my life." He leaned down and pressed his forehead gently to hers. "I didn't get to have you for long," he whispered, voice cracking. "But you made me a father in a way I never thought possible." He stepped back, face soaked with silent tears, and in the stillness of that room, it felt like the world itself had paused to bow its head. The hours passed. Nurses came and went, gentle in their movements. No one rushed the process. No one tried to break the silence. Annabelle sat beside Kim through it all. She didn't speak, didn't move, just held her daughter's hand as if letting go would erase everything they'd lived through together. At one point, a nurse entered with a clean set of clothes and a folded bag of Kim's things. "I packed up her belongings, Miss Carter," she said softly. Annabelle nodded, eyes fixed ahead. But just as the nurse turned to leave, Annabelle reached for the small blue backpack resting on the counter, the one Kim had insisted on bringing with her, even into surgery prep. She opened the front pocket, half expecting to find just crayons, maybe a few folded drawings. But inside, tucked beneath a rolled-up sweater, was a sheet of paper, crumpled at the corners, half finished. A sketch. The drawing wasn't detailed, just outlines, rough shapes. But Annabelle knew exactly what it was. It was a garden. A wide, blooming garden with children playing. Some were running, some sitting in wheelchairs, others chasing butterflies. Trees arched over stone benches, and in the middle stood a woman in an apron and name tag, laughing. Beside her, a tall man with a graying beard offered tea to a child holding a pencil. At the top of the page were faint pencil lines where Kim had begun to write something. Annabelle blinked away the tears and leaned in. It read, "Du chao hong ve song, chao tin moi ngoi, se tiep tukto mau kuok song nai." Even if I don't finish the picture, I believe someone else will keep coloring life in. Annabelle pressed the drawing to her chest, and for the first time that day, her tears fell freely. Not the kind that screamed, but the kind that honored. Later that evening, Walter returned alone. He sat by Kim's bedside, fingers laced together. "You knew more about the world than most adults," he said softly. "You understood kindness in a way we forget. You saw people. You saw me." He looked toward the empty chair where Annabelle had sat all day. She said, "You always believed there was good in people, that even in pain, you found beauty." Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside, it was a second pin, identical to the one he'd placed in her hand. He kept it, not to remember her by, but to remind himself of who he became because of her. The hospital would later say she passed peacefully. The staff, the doctors, even the janitor, everyone cried. Kim Carter had been more than a patient. She was the light that made a cold place warm. And in the weeks to come, that light would spread in ways even she never imagined. 1 year later, the hospital courtyard looked very different. What was once an empty concrete space behind the East Wing had transformed into something vibrant, a small haven filled with flowers, murals, benches, and the gentle hum of children's laughter. Lanterns made of colored paper swung from poles along the walkway. Wind chimes sang from the trees. And in the center, standing proud beneath the spring sun, was a plaque that read, "The Carter Room," in memory of Kimberly Carter, a light to us all. Behind it stood a modest 2-story building, painted in soft pastels and surrounded by a garden of wildflowers. It wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to house mothers who had nowhere to stay while their children fought for their lives. Enough to offer shelter, meals, and a warm hand to hold. Its official name was Kimmy's Light Foundation, founded by Walter Reed, funded with the quiet grace of someone who had once believed in nothing but contracts and numbers. Now, he believed in legacy. Inside the Carter Room, Annabelle Carter stood at the reception desk, her name now listed on the wall, not just as a mother, but as program director. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, her hair tied up in a loose bun. The lanyard around her neck read, "Staff, here to help." And she was, every day. She helped coordinate food donations, greeted new families, reviewed support applications. But more than that, she listened. To the young mother with a newborn just diagnosed, to the exhausted grandmother watching over 2 sick grandkids, to the fathers who didn't know how to talk about fear without sounding weak. Annabelle had lived it, and that's what made her the soul of Kimmy's Light. That afternoon, as dusk began to settle, she stepped outside onto the garden path. Children ran across the lawn, their paper lanterns glowing from tiny battery lights inside. Some wore scarves, others hospital bracelets, all of them laughing. Walter stood nearby, a cup of tea in hand, watching with a calm smile. He had aged gently in that year, more relaxed, less rigid. His suit jacket was replaced by a cardigan. His phone stayed in his pocket now. He noticed Annabelle and walked over. "She would have loved this," he said. "She does love this," Annabelle replied. "Every part of it has her in it." They stood in silence for a while. Then, as the lanterns flickered across the yard like tiny stars, Annabelle added softly, "Du kim hong kon ojai. Nhung an sang kwa kon van soi juong cho, hang tram sin men kat juok song the mot lan nua." Walter nodded, eyes shining. "Kimmy's Light," he whispered. And in that moment, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Kim Carter's life may have been short, but the light she left behind still shines, brighter than ever. In a world often clouded by loss and indifference, sometimes it only takes a little girl who keeps smiling, a mother who never breaks, and a man who chooses to feel again. For everything to change, we don't get to choose how long we live, but we do get to choose how deeply we love. Kim chose kindness, Walter chose transformation, and Annabelle chose unconditional love, even when it hurt. What about you? If a child like Kim could bring hope in her darkest hour, could you choose to be more kind today? Have you ever met someone like her, someone whose quiet strength became a light for others? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too. Thank you so much for watching this emotional journey. See you in the next story, because true light never fades.